The autumn sun cast long shadows across the playground at Riverside Academy, one of Chicago's most exclusive private schools. 6-year-old Jamie Sullivan sat alone on a weathered wooden bench, clutching his backpack strap as if it were a lifeline. His prosthetic leg, hidden beneath perfectly pressed uniform pants, ached with the familiar throb that had become his constant companion. Jamie was used to sitting apart. As the son of tech billionaire Robert Sullivan, he understood that questions often led to whispers, and whispers sometimes led to something worse. The other children's laughter echoed across the playground, but it felt miles away from where he sat. "Why are you sitting here all by yourself?" The voice was small but steady. Jamie looked up to see Maya Chen standing in front of him, her sneakers dusty from racing across the playground. Her hair was pulled back in slightly uneven pigtails, and her brown eyes sparkled with genuine curiosity. At 6 years old, Maya was small for her age, but there was something fierce about her presence. Jamie hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. "They don't want me over there." Maya tilted her head. "Why not?" Before Jamie could answer, cruel laughter cut through the air. 3 boys from their class approached with smirks plastered across their faces. The tallest, Tyler Morrison, held a carton of chocolate milk like a weapon. His friends flanked him, dragging their feet through the wood chips with theatrical menace. "Well, look at this," Tyler sneered. The robot boy made a friend. He squinted at Maya, then let out a harsh laugh. "Oh wait, I see. The broken toy and the scholarship kid. What a perfect pair of losers." Maya's face flushed, but she didn't back down. She'd heard comments about her second-hand clothes and her grandmother's beat-up car dropping her off at school. But something about the way they pointed at Jamie, the way his shoulders hunched in shame, ignited a fire in her chest. "That's not funny," she shouted, stepping forward so quickly the boys blinked in surprise. "You don't get to talk to us like that." One of Tyler's friends flicked crumbs from his sandwich at Jamie, while another threw a wadded napkin. Jamie hunched further, his cheeks burning red, wishing he could disappear entirely. "Stop it!" Maya's voice cracked, but she planted herself firmly between Jamie and his tormentors. "You're cowards. Picking on someone because he's different doesn't make you tough. It makes you mean and pathetic." Tyler's face darkened. "Or what, little girl? You gonna fight us?" He scooped up a handful of wood chips, raising them threateningly. Maya lifted her chin defiantly, her small fists clenched at her sides. "Or I'll tell Mrs. Patterson you were throwing food again, and I'll tell my grandmother. She knows how to make people listen." Her voice grew fierce. "And everyone's watching. They can all see how ugly you really are inside." The playground had indeed grown quieter. Other children stared, some wide-eyed, others whispering behind their hands. The bullies shifted uncomfortably, their bravado crumbling under the weight of the attention. "Whatever," Tyler muttered, dropping the wood chips. "This isn't over." He jerked his head toward his friends, and they slunk away, casting nervous glances over their shoulders. Jamie sat frozen, chocolate milk dripping from his shirt. Maya immediately turned to him, pulling a crumpled tissue from her pocket. She dabbed at the stains with gentle, careful movements, her fierce expression softening into kindness. "They're just stupid," she said firmly. "Don't let them make you feel small." Jamie swallowed hard, his chest aching with a mixture of shame and something else, something warm and unfamiliar. "Why did you do that?" he asked, his voice trembling. Maya shrugged, then broke into a gap-toothed grin. "Because it was wrong, and because I think you could be my friend, if you want to." The school bell rang sharp and commanding, sending children scrambling toward the red brick building. Jamie stood slowly, his prosthetic knee clicking stiffly. He stumbled slightly, and without hesitation, Maya grabbed his arm to steady him. "There," she said with a smile. "Better." For the first time in a very long time, Jamie believed her. The ride home that afternoon felt longer than usual. Jamie sat in the back of the black luxury SUV, staring through tinted windows as Chicago's skyline blurred past. The interior smelled of leather and expensive cologne, every surface pristine and cold. His stepmother's husband, Robert, was on a conference call, his voice low and commanding as words like acquisitions and quarterly projections filled the space. Jamie pressed his forehead against the cool glass, He should have been replaying the taunts from earlier, the sting of laughter, the milk dripping down his shirt. That was the usual rhythm of his afternoons. But today another memory intruded. Maya, small but fierce, standing her ground, her voice sharp as she called the bullies cowards. No one had ever defended him before. The memory clung to him like a beacon of hope. When the SUV pulled through the iron gates of the Sullivan estate, Jamie felt the familiar weight of expectation settle on his shoulders. The mansion rose from manicured lawns like something from a magazine, soaring glass walls, modern angles, and a fountain that sparkled in the setting sun. Inside, his stepmother, Catherine, was waiting. She stood at the base of the floating staircase, every strand of her platinum blonde hair perfectly styled, her smile wide but cold. Catherine had married Robert when Jamie was 4, and she'd been managing his image ever since. "You're late," she said, brushing invisible dust from Jamie's shoulder. "Did you have another episode?" Her eyes dropped to the faint stain on his shirt. Jamie stiffened. "No." She arched a perfectly shaped eyebrow. "Then why is your uniform dirty? You know your father expects you to represent this family with dignity." Robert ended his call and placed a distracted hand on Jamie's shoulder, though his eyes were already back on his phone. "He's fine, Cat. Let him breathe." Catherine's lips tightened, but she said nothing more. Instead, she ushered Jamie toward the dining room, where dinner was laid out with military precision. The long glass tables stretched across the space, each place setting arranged with mathematical accuracy. Jamie picked at his carefully portioned meal in silence, his mind wandering back to Maya. She had looked so small standing up to those 3 boys, yet somehow she'd seemed taller than all of them combined. When she stood in front of him, protecting him, he'd felt something he'd never experienced before, the power of someone believing in him. His fork slipped from his fingers, clattering against the plate. Catherine's eyes flicked up sharply. "Clumsy again," she murmured. "Perhaps you're overtired. We may need to scale back your physical therapy sessions. Too much strain isn't good for someone in your condition." Jamie's throat tightened. "I can handle it." Her gaze sharpened. "That's not for you to decide, James." After dinner, Catherine escorted Jamie to his room, a sprawling space filled with expensive toys he never played with and shelves of books he'd never read. As she tucked him into bed with clinical precision, she adjusted his blanket and spoke softly. "You must be careful about who you spend time with," she said almost kindly. "Not everyone belongs in your world, Jamie. Some children don't understand what it means to be part of this family. It's best to keep your distance." Jamie wanted to argue, to tell her that Maya understood him better than anyone at school ever had, but the weight of Catherine's gaze pressed down like stone, and he simply nodded. He turned onto his side, pretending to sleep until she left. Only then did he allow himself to think about Maya's words. "I think you could be my friend." The word echoed in the darkness, warm and full of possibility. Friend. The next morning brought rain that drummed against the mansion's floor-to-ceiling windows. Jamie sat at the breakfast counter, pushing scrambled eggs around his plate, while Catherine scrolled through her tablet, occasionally making disapproving sounds at whatever she was reading. "The weatherman says it should clear by afternoon," she said without looking up. "Perfect timing for your appointment with Dr. Harrison." Jamie's stomach clenched. Dr. Harrison was Catherine's chosen specialist, a stern man who always seemed to find new reasons why Jamie's prosthetic needed adjustments. Each visit left him in more pain than before, but Catherine insisted it was necessary for his long-term health. At school that morning, the playground was slick with rain, forcing the children inside for recess. Jamie found himself in the art room, absently coloring, while other kids chattered around tables covered with construction paper and glue sticks. He'd grown used to the isolation. It was safer than trying to join in and being rejected. "Hey, Jamie." He looked up to see Maya sliding into the seat beside him, her backpack bouncing as she settled in. She pulled out a crumpled piece of paper and smoothed it on the table. "I drew something for you," she announced breathlessly. The drawing was simple but heartfelt. 2 stick figures standing together under a rainbow, both smiling widely. One had curly hair like Maya's, and the other wore what looked like a tiny prosthetic leg. "That's us," she explained proudly. Best friends. Jamie stared at the drawing, his throat tight with emotion. No one had ever drawn a picture of him before, let alone one that showed him as equal, as wanted, as normal. You can keep it, Maya said, noticing his expression. My grandma always says pictures hold feelings. So when you look at it, you'll remember you're not alone. The art teacher called for cleanup and Maya helped Jamie gather the scattered crayons. As they walked to their next class, she chatted about her grandmother's garden, about the cat that visited their apartment, about anything and everything. Jamie found himself relaxing, even laughing at her silly jokes. But their moment of peace was shattered when Tyler and his friends cornered them in the hallway. Look, it's the charity case and her pet robot, Tyler sneered. He deliberately bumped into Jamie, causing him to stumble. Oops, still can't walk straight, huh? Before Jamie could recover, Maya stepped between them, her small frame vibrating with fury. Back off, Tyler. We're not bothering you. Tyler laughed harshly. You're both bothering me just by existing. A poor Asian girl and a broken rich boy. What's next? Are you going to hold hands and skip to class? Heat flooded Jamie's face, but Maya's response was swift and cutting. At least we're not bullies. At least we don't have to hurt people to feel important. Her words hung in the air like a challenge. Tyler's face reddened, but before he could respond, a teacher appeared at the end of the hallway and he melted away with his friends. Maya turned to Jamie, her expression softening. Are you okay? Jamie nodded, though his hands were shaking. Why do you keep helping me? Maya looked at him as if the question were absurd. Because it's right. And because you're worth helping. That afternoon, Dr. Harrison's office felt like a cold, sterile prison. Jamie sat on the examination table while the doctor made notes on his chart, occasionally poking and prodding at his prosthetic with clinical detachment. The alignment is still off, Dr. Harrison announced, though Jamie hadn't complained of any problems. We'll need to make some adjustments. It may be uncomfortable for a few weeks, but it's necessary for proper development. Catherine nodded approvingly from her chair in the corner. Whatever you think is best, Doctor. Jamie wanted to protest. His leg had been feeling better lately, and he'd even managed to keep up with Maya on the playground. But the words stuck in his throat as Dr. Harrison began loosening screws and repositioning components. When they finished, Jamie's leg felt wrong, tight and painful in a way it hadn't been before. He took a tentative step and nearly fell. Perfect, Dr. Harrison said, making another note. The instability will encourage him to rely more on his upper body strength and develop better balance. On the ride home, Jamie bit his lip to keep from crying out with each bump in the road. Catherine glanced at him in the rearview mirror. I know it's difficult, she said in her syrupy sweet voice, but Dr. Harrison knows what's best. These adjustments will help you in the long run. Jamie stared out the window, Maya's drawing clutched in his hand. For the first time, he found himself questioning whether the adults in his life really did know what was best. 3 days after the doctor's appointment, Jamie was struggling. Each step sent shooting pain up his leg, and the new adjustments had left him more unsteady than ever. He'd fallen twice at school, once in front of the entire cafeteria, earning snickers and pointing fingers. Maya noticed immediately. During lunch, she watched him carefully as he navigated the cafeteria with obvious difficulty. Your leg's worse, she said bluntly when they sat down at their usual table. What did that doctor do? Jamie shrugged, not wanting to admit how much he was hurting. He said it would help in the long run. Maya's eyes narrowed. That's what adults always say when they don't want to explain something. Trust me, it's for your own good. She made air quotes with her fingers, her expression skeptical. After school, instead of heading straight to his waiting SUV, Jamie lingered by the fence where Maya was talking to her grandmother. Mrs. Chen was a small woman with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her clothes were simple but clean, and she carried a worn canvas bag filled with groceries. Grandma, this is Jamie, Maya said proudly, the friend I told you about. Mrs. Chen's eyes were kind but sharp as she looked at Jamie. So you're the young man my Maya won't stop talking about. Her gaze dropped to his leg, and her expression grew serious. You're in pain. It wasn't a question. Jamie shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward his waiting car where the driver was checking his phone. I'm okay. No, you're not. Mrs. Chen's voice was gentle but firm. I worked as a nurse's aide for 30 years before I retired. I know what pain looks like. She studied his posture, the careful way he held his weight. Who's been treating you? Jamie hesitated. He'd been taught never to discuss family business with strangers, but something about Mrs. Chen's steady gaze made him feel safe. Dr. Harrison. He just adjusted my prosthetic. Mrs. Chen's eyebrows drew together. Adjusted it how? You were walking better last week. Maya nodded vigorously. He was. We even raced to the swings. The driver honked and Jamie flinched. I have to go. Mrs. Chen placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Listen to me, child. Sometimes the people who say they're helping us aren't really helping at all. Trust your body. Trust what you feel. That evening at dinner, Jamie barely touched his food. The pain was constant now, a throbbing ache that made it hard to concentrate on anything else. Catherine noticed his lack of appetite and frowned. You need to eat, James. Dr. Harrison said proper nutrition is essential during adjustment periods. It hurts, Jamie said quietly. More than before. Catherine's smile tightened. Growth is often uncomfortable. You'll adapt. Robert looked up from his phone for the first time during the meal. Maybe we should get a second opinion. The suggestion hung in the air like a bomb. Catherine's fork clattered against her plate. A second opinion, she repeated, her voice carefully controlled. From whom? Dr. Harrison is the best pediatric orthopedist in the city. Are you questioning his expertise? Robert rubbed his temples. I'm not questioning anyone. I'm just saying if Jamie's in pain, children his age often exaggerate discomfort, Catherine interrupted smoothly. It's perfectly normal. Dr. Harrison warned us this might happen. Jamie watched the exchange with growing understanding. Catherine wasn't listening to him. She wasn't even trying to understand his pain. She was dismissing it, minimizing it, making it disappear with words. But Mrs. Chen's voice echoed in his mind. Trust your body. Trust what you feel. For the first time, Jamie began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, his pain was trying to tell him something important. The following Tuesday brought the kind of crisp autumn day that made Chicago sparkle. Jamie arrived at school early, his leg still aching but his mind clearer than it had been in days. He'd spent the weekend thinking about Mrs. Chen's words, about the way Maya never doubted him, about the difference between how he felt around them versus how he felt at home. Maya was waiting by their usual spot near the oak tree, bouncing a small rubber ball against the ground. When she saw him approaching, her face lit up. I brought something, she announced, digging into her backpack. She produced a thermos and 2 plastic cups. Grandma's special tea. She says it helps with aches and pains. The tea was warm and slightly sweet, tasting of ginger and honey. As Jamie sipped it, he felt some of the tension in his shoulders ease. My grandma wants to talk to you again, Maya said casually. She thinks maybe she can help with your leg. Jamie nearly choked on his tea. Help how? She used to work with people who had prosthetics. She knows stuff about fitting and alignment. Maya's eyes were serious. She thinks maybe someone's been doing it wrong. The possibility both thrilled and terrified Jamie. I can't. Catherine would never allow it. Does Catherine wear a prosthetic leg? No, but then how does she know what feels right? Maya's logic was simple, but devastating. Jamie, you're the one living in that body. You should have a say in how it feels. Their conversation was interrupted by the familiar sound of Tyler and his crew approaching. But something was different today. Tyler's usual swagger was more subdued, and his friends hung back slightly. Hey, Tyler said, his voice lacking its usual venom. He gestured toward Jamie's leg. How's the robot thing? Jamie blinked, surprised by what almost sounded like genuine curiosity. It's not great right now. Tyler nodded awkwardly. My cousin has one. A prosthetic, I mean. He's in the army. He scuffed his shoe against the ground. He says sometimes the doctors don't get it right the first time. The admission hung between them, fragile and unexpected. Maya watched the exchange with wide eyes, clearly as shocked as Jamie by Tyler's sudden humanity. Maybe, Tyler began, then stopped, his face reddening. Maybe I was being a jerk before, about the whole... you know. It wasn't a complete apology, but it was something. Jamie felt a small knot of tension in his chest begin to loosen. Yeah, he said quietly. Maybe. Tyler nodded once more, then walked away with his friends, leaving Jamie and Maya staring after him in amazement. Did that really just happen? Maya whispered. I think so. That afternoon, Jamie made a decision that would change everything. Instead of going straight to his waiting SUV, he followed Maya to where Mrs. Chen was standing by the fence. This time, he didn't hesitate. Mrs. Chen, he said, his voice stronger than he felt. Would you mind looking at my leg? Her weathered face broke into a gentle smile. Of course, child, but not here. Too many eyes. She glanced meaningfully toward the parking lot where expensive cars waited for their privileged passengers. Come by our apartment after school tomorrow if you're sure you want to. Jamie thought about the constant pain, about Dr. Harrison's cold hands and Catherine's dismissive smiles, about the way Mrs. Chen's eyes had seen his hurt when no one else would acknowledge it. I'm sure. The next day, Jamie told his driver he was going to the library to work on a school project. It wasn't entirely a lie. He was researching something important, just not in books. Maya's apartment was in a modest complex about 15 minutes from school, worlds away from the Sullivan estate. The building was older, with chipped paint and a small courtyard where children played while their parents watched from folding chairs. Mrs. Chen greeted them at the door, her small apartment warm with the smell of cooking spices and the sound of soft jazz playing from an old radio. Family photos covered every surface, graduations, birthdays, ordinary moments made precious by love. Sit, she instructed, patting a worn but comfortable sofa. Let me see what we're working with. With Maya holding his hand for support, Jamie allowed Mrs. Chen to examine his prosthetic. Her touch was completely different from Dr. Harrison's, gentle, respectful, patient. She asked questions about how things felt, where it hurt, how long the pain lasted. This is all wrong, she said finally, her voice heavy with concern. The socket is poorly fitted, the alignment is off, and the padding is creating pressure points that should never exist. She looked up at him with troubled eyes. Who did this to you? Jamie explained about Dr. Harrison, about the adjustments, about Catherine's insistence that the pain was normal and necessary. With each word, Mrs. Chen's frown deepened. This isn't adjustment, she said firmly. This is sabotage. Someone has deliberately made this prosthetic function poorly. The words hit Jamie like a physical blow. But why would someone do that? Mrs. Chen's expression was grave. Sometimes, child, people keep others weak to maintain control. If you can't walk properly, you need more help. If you need more help, you depend more on the people providing it. Maya's hand tightened in his. That's evil, she whispered. That's manipulation, Mrs. Chen corrected gently. And it stops now. She disappeared into a back room and returned with a small toolbox. I can't fix everything that's wrong, but I can make some basic adjustments to get you started. The real work will need a proper prosthetist. As she worked, loosening screws, adjusting padding, realigning components, she talked about the importance of advocacy, about speaking up for yourself, about the difference between authority and wisdom. When Jamie finally stood and took a tentative step, the difference was remarkable. The sharp, constant pain had dulled to a minor ache. His balance was better, his gait more natural. How does that feel? Mrs. Chen asked. Jamie took another step, then another. For the first time in weeks, walking didn't feel like torture. Better, he breathed. So much better. Maya clapped her hands. I told you Grandma was magic, Mrs. Chen chuckled. Not magic, sweetheart, just experience and common sense. She turned back to Jamie. "But this is temporary. You need proper care from someone who knows what they're doing, and you need to tell your father what's been happening." Jamie's stomach clenched with fear. "He won't believe me. Catherine says Dr. Harrison is the best." "The best at what?" Mrs. Chen's voice was sharp. "The best doctors don't cause pain. They relieve it. They don't create dependency. They build strength." As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Chen handed Jamie a piece of paper with a name and phone number written in careful script. "Dr. Sarah Martinez," she explained. "She's a prosthetist at Northwestern Memorial. She works with children and adults, and she actually listens to her patients. If you can't convince your father to take you to her, then you come back here and we'll figure out another way." Walking back to the waiting SUV, Jamie felt lighter than he had in months, not just because of the physical relief, but because someone had finally validated what he'd been feeling. His pain wasn't normal, his struggles weren't necessary. He wasn't broken, his prosthetic was, but as the familiar weight of home approached, his newfound hope began to war with deep-seated fear. Catherine controlled every aspect of his medical care, every appointment, every decision. How could he possibly convince his father to listen when Catherine was so skilled at making her voice the only one that mattered? The answer came to him as they pulled through the estate gates. He couldn't do it alone. But maybe, with Maya and Mrs. Chen supporting him, he wouldn't have to. That evening, Jamie sat in his room staring at Dr. Martinez's phone number. The piece of paper felt both weightless and heavy, representing possibility and terror in equal measure. Through his window, the estate grounds sparkled with automated sprinklers, everything perfectly manicured and controlled. He thought about Mrs. Chen's words. Sometimes people keep others weak to maintain control. The possibility that Catherine might be deliberately keeping him in pain was almost too horrible to consider, but the evidence was becoming harder to ignore. Downstairs, he could hear his parents in the living room, Robert's deep voice mixing with Catherine's lighter tones, discussing dinner plans and weekend events as if everything were normal, as if their son wasn't sitting upstairs questioning everything he'd been told about his own body. Jamie made his decision. He found them in the study, Robert reading through quarterly reports while Catherine organized her calendar for the following week. They looked up in surprise when he entered. Children were generally expected to stay in their rooms during adult time. "Dad?" Jamie's voice was smaller than he'd intended. "I need to talk to you about my leg." Catherine's smile was swift and practiced. "Is it bothering you again, sweetheart? I told you the adjustment period would be difficult." "It's not just bothering me," Jamie said, forcing himself to speak louder. "It hurts. All the time. And it's gotten worse since Dr. Harrison's appointment." Robert set down his papers, his expression shifting to concern. "Worse how?" "I can barely walk without pain. I've fallen twice at school, and before the appointment I was actually doing better." Jamie pulled Dr. Martinez's number from his pocket. "Mrs. Chen, Maya's grandmother, she used to work with prosthetics. She says mine is fitted wrong on purpose." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Catherine's smile hardened into something sharp and brittle. "James," she said, her voice syrupy with false concern, "you cannot be seriously considering medical advice from a janitor." "She was a nurse's aide for 30 years, Jamie shot back, his courage growing. "And she actually listened to me, instead of telling me my pain doesn't matter." Robert looked between them, confusion evident on his face. "Catherine, maybe we should get another opinion. If Jamie's in that much pain—" "From whom?" Catherine's mask was slipping, her voice rising slightly. "Some hack at a public hospital. Dr. Harrison has been treating pediatric cases for 20 years. Are we really going to throw away his expertise because a child is complaining?" "I'm not just complaining." The words burst out of Jamie with surprising force. "I'm telling the truth. Mrs. Chen showed me what's wrong. The socket is too tight, the alignment is off, and the padding is creating pressure points that shouldn't exist. She fixed some of it, and I could actually walk without wanting to cry." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert stared at his son as if seeing him clearly for the first time in years, while Catherine's face had gone pale with barely contained fury. "You let some stranger adjust your prosthetic?" Catherine's voice was deadly quiet. Do you have any idea how dangerous that could have been? How completely irresponsible? It wasn't dangerous, Jamie said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. It was helpful. More helpful than anything Dr. Harrison has ever done. Robert stood slowly, his business-trained mind clearly processing the implications of what he was hearing. Catherine, I want to see Dr. Harrison's notes from the last few appointments. All of them. Robert, you're being ridiculous. I want to see them tonight. The authority in his voice brooked no argument. Catherine's smile was now a grimace, her perfect composure cracking like ice over thin water. Fine, she said through gritted teeth. But when you see that everything has been done according to proper medical protocol, I expect apologies all around. As his parents began what was clearly going to be a lengthy and heated discussion, Jamie slipped back to his room. For the first time in his young life, he had spoken truth to power and been heard. The outcome was still uncertain, but something fundamental had shifted. He pulled out his phone, a privilege he'd only recently been granted, and carefully typed out a message to Maya. I told them, Dad is looking at the medical files tonight. Her response came almost immediately. Proud of you. The emojis made him smile despite his nerves. Maya was right to be proud. He'd finally found his voice, and he wasn't planning to lose it again. Robert Sullivan had built his fortune by paying attention to details others missed, by asking the right questions, and following the evidence wherever it led. As he sat in his study at midnight, poring over Jamie's medical files, those same instincts were screaming that something was very, very wrong. Dr. Harrison's notes were meticulously detailed, documenting each necessary adjustment and progressive treatment modification. But when Robert cross-referenced them with the billing records, a disturbing pattern emerged. Every appointment resulted in expensive modifications, additional equipment, and extended treatment plans. What should have been routine maintenance had become an industry. More troubling were the photos. Each prosthetic fitting was documented with before and after images, and Robert didn't need medical training to see that his son's posture became progressively worse with each adjustment. The confident little boy who'd first received his prosthetic at age 4 had gradually become the hunched, uncertain child who could barely walk without visible pain. A soft knock at the door interrupted his investigation. Jamie stood in the doorway, clutching a stuffed elephant he hadn't carried in years, a sign of how much stress he was under. Can't sleep either, Robert asked gently. Jamie shook his head and settled into the leather chair across from the desk. In the lamplight, he looked impossibly young and vulnerable. Dad, are you going to fire Dr. Harrison? Robert studied his son's face, seeing hope and fear warring in his dark eyes. What would you like me to do? I want to see Dr. Martinez, the one Mrs. Chen told me about. Jamie's voice was barely above a whisper. I want someone to look at my leg who doesn't already have their mind made up about what's wrong with me. The simple request broke Robert's heart. When had his child become so resigned to not being heard? When had asking for basic medical care required such courage? We'll call her first thing in the morning, Robert promised. Jamie's shoulders sagged with relief. Catherine's going to be really angry. Let me worry about Catherine. The next morning brought a confrontation that would reshape the Sullivan household forever. Catherine, having spent a sleepless night anticipating this moment, was dressed immaculately and armed with a folder of supporting documentation. I've contacted Dr. Harrison, she announced, as Robert and Jamie entered the breakfast room. He's agreed to see us this afternoon to review Jamie's progress and address any concerns. That won't be necessary, Robert replied calmly, pouring coffee with steady hands. I've scheduled an appointment with Dr. Martinez at Northwestern Memorial for tomorrow morning. Catherine's coffee cup rattled against its saucer. You've what? I've done exactly what any responsible parent would do when their child reports chronic pain that's getting worse instead of better. Robert's voice carried the authority he used in boardrooms, leaving no room for argument. I've sought a second opinion. From a complete stranger who knows nothing about Jamie's case history. From a board-certified prosthetist who specializes in pediatric cases and comes highly recommended by the rehabilitation department at one of the country's top hospitals. Jamie watched the tennis match of words, his heart pounding. This was it, the moment when everything would either change or snap back to the painful status quo. Catherine changed tactics, her voice softening into the manipulative sweetness Jamie knew so well. "Robert, darling, I understand you're concerned. I'm concerned too. But Jamie has always been prone to exaggeration, and children his age often resist necessary medical treatments. Dr. Harrison warned us this might happen." Did Dr. Harrison also warn us that Jamie would show significant improvement after a retired nurse's aide made basic adjustments to his prosthetic? Robert's question landed like a bomb. "Because that's exactly what happened yesterday." The mask finally slipped completely. Catherine's face contorted with fury. "You allowed an unqualified stranger to perform medical procedures on our son? Are you completely out of your mind? I allowed someone who listened to him to help him walk without pain, something we should have done years ago." Jamie found his voice small but clear. "She didn't hurt me. She made it better." Catherine whirled toward him, her eyes blazing. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You're a child. You don't understand the complexities of your condition or the long-term consequences of improper treatment." "I understand pain," Jamie said, his voice growing stronger. "And I understand the difference between someone who wants to help me and someone who wants to control me." The words hit their target with devastating accuracy. Catherine's face went white, then red, as she struggled to regain her composure. "I have done nothing but protect you," she hissed. "Everything I've done has been for your own good." "No," Jamie said with a clarity that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. "Everything you've done has been to keep me weak, to keep me needing you. Mrs. Chen explained it to me, but I don't need you to hurt anymore. I need you to stop." Robert stared at his son in amazement. This confident, articulate child bore little resemblance to the fearful boy who'd been hiding in his room just days earlier. Something had awakened in Jamie. Not just his voice, but his sense of his own worth. Catherine made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "Fine," she said, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "Call your precious doctor. Get your second opinion. But when Jamie suffers complications from this reckless course of action, don't come crying to me." She stormed from the room, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floors. The sound echoed through the mansion like gunshots, and then there was silence. Robert reached across the table and placed his hand over Jamie's much smaller one. "Are you okay?" Jamie nodded, though his hands were shaking slightly. "I think so. I was scared she'd convince you not to let me see Dr. Martinez." "Nothing and nobody is going to stop you from getting the care you need," Robert said firmly. "I promise you that." Dr. Sarah Martinez's office was nothing like Dr. Harrison's sterile, intimidating suite. The walls were painted in warm colors, decorated with children's artwork and photographs of smiling patients. The examination tables had colorful cushions, and a small play area in the corner was filled with adaptive toys designed for children with various physical challenges. Dr. Martinez herself was a petite woman with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She greeted Jamie and Robert with genuine warmth, shaking Jamie's hand first and asking him directly about his concerns. "Tell me about your pain," she said, settling into a chair at Jamie's eye level rather than looming over him. "When does it hurt most? What does it feel like? Don't let anyone else answer for you. I want to hear it from you." Jamie glanced at his father, who nodded encouragingly. "It hurts all the time," he began, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "Sharp pains when I walk, aching when I sit, and it gets worse throughout the day. It's been really bad since my last appointment with Dr. Harrison." Dr. Martinez listened intently, asking follow-up questions and taking careful notes. Then she asked to examine the prosthetic itself. What she found made her face grave with concern. "Mr. Sullivan," she said after several minutes of careful inspection, "I need to show you something." She guided them to a computer where she pulled up images of properly fitted prosthetics alongside photos she'd just taken of Jamie's device. The differences were stark, even to Robert's untrained eye. "This socket is the wrong size entirely," she explained, pointing to various components. "It's too narrow here, which creates pressure points, and too loose here, which causes instability. The knee joint is positioned incorrectly, forcing Jamie to compensate with his hip and back. And these padding modifications, she shook her head. I've never seen anything like this. It's as if someone deliberately tried to make walking as difficult and painful as possible. Robert's face darkened. Are you saying this was intentional? Dr. Martinez chose her words carefully. I'm saying that these modifications would require specific knowledge and deliberate effort to implement. They're not the result of inexperience or accident. Jamie felt vindicated and horrified in equal measure. Mrs. Chen had been right. This was sabotage. Can you fix it? He asked quietly. Dr. Martinez smiled. Jamie, I can do much better than fix it. I can build you a prosthetic that actually works with your body instead of against it. It'll take a few weeks to manufacture, but in the meantime, I can make some adjustments to what you have that should provide significant relief. The modifications took less than an hour. When Jamie stood and took his first steps, the difference was remarkable. The constant pain that had become his normal was reduced to a minor discomfort, and his balance improved dramatically. How does that feel? Dr. Martinez asked. Jamie took several more steps, then broke into a careful jog around the examination room. For the first time in years, movement felt like freedom instead of punishment. It feels like me, he said, tears streaming down his face. It feels like I'm supposed to feel. Robert had to turn away to compose himself. The contrast between his son's joy now and the resigned pain he'd carried for so long was devastating. How had they missed this? How had he trusted Catherine's judgment over his own child's experience? Dr. Martinez, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I need to ask you something, and I need your honest professional opinion. Could someone with medical training have deliberately sabotaged my son's prosthetic to keep him dependent and in pain? She met his gaze steadily. Yes, Mr. Sullivan. Someone could have done exactly that. The drive home was quiet, both Robert and Jamie processing what they'd learned. Jamie sat straighter in his seat, marveling at how different his body felt without constant pain. He kept flexing his ankle, testing the improved fit, hardly able to believe the relief was real. Dad, he said as they neared the estate, are you going to confront Catherine? Robert's hands tightened on the steering wheel. I'm going to do more than confront her. I'm going to find out exactly how deep this goes and who else was involved. They found Catherine in the sunroom, calmly arranging flowers as if nothing had happened. She looked up with a practiced smile when they entered, her eyes immediately assessing Jamie's improved posture. How did your little adventure go? She asked sweetly. Dr. Martinez confirmed what we suspected, Robert said without preamble. Jamie's prosthetic has been deliberately sabotaged. The modifications were intentional and required specific medical knowledge to implement. Catherine's hands stilled on the flowers, but her expression remained composed. That's a very serious accusation to make against Dr. Harrison, based on the opinion of someone who's never treated Jamie before. It's not an accusation, Robert replied. It's a fact. Dr. Martinez documented everything. She's prepared to testify if necessary. Testify? Catherine laughed, but the sound was brittle. Robert, you're being dramatic. Even if Dr. Harrison made some questionable choices, I'm sure he had Jamie's best interests at heart. Did you? The question hung in the air like a blade. Catherine's mask finally began to crack, her composure wavering under Robert's steady gaze. Of course I did. Everything I've done has been to protect Jamie, to ensure he receives the best possible care. The best possible care doesn't involve keeping a child in unnecessary pain, Jamie interrupted, his voice stronger than either adult had ever heard it. The best care doesn't involve making someone weak, so they'll need you more. Catherine turned to him, her eyes flashing with something ugly and desperate. You don't understand the complexities of your condition. You're a child. You have no idea what's best for you. I know what pain feels like, Jamie said steadily, and I know the difference between someone who wants to help me and someone who wants to control me. Mrs. Chen helped me walk better in 10 minutes than Dr. Harrison did in 2 years. Mrs. Chen is nobody, Catherine snapped, her careful facade finally cracking completely. A retired nurse's aide with no credentials, no authority, no understanding of your needs. She understood that I was hurting and that I didn't need to be, Jamie replied with devastating simplicity. Robert watched this exchange with growing clarity. He'd built his business empire by reading people, by understanding motivations and hidden agendas. Catherine's fury wasn't that of someone whose expertise had been questioned. It was the rage of someone whose carefully constructed deception was being exposed. "How much did you pay Dr. Harrison?" he asked quietly. The question caught Catherine off guard. "What? How much did you pay him to keep Jamie dependent, to ensure that he'd never be strong enough to question your authority or independent enough to threaten your position in this family?" Catherine's face went white, then red. That's a ridiculous accusation. I would never—" "The billing records don't lie, Catherine. Neither do the photographs documenting Jamie's deteriorating condition. And neither does the fact that his pain improved dramatically the moment someone else touched his prosthetic." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths and crumbling lies. Finally, Catherine spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't understand what it's like, trying to be a mother to a child who isn't yours, who represents everything about your husband's past that you can never be part of. Jamie needed me. I made sure he needed me." The admission hit like a physical blow. Jamie staggered backward, the full weight of what she'd done crashing over him. She'd stolen years of his childhood, filled them with unnecessary pain and limitation, all to ensure her own importance in his life. "You made me suffer," he said, his voice breaking. "You made me believe I was broken when I never was." Robert moved between them, his face dark with controlled fury. "Pack your things, Catherine. I want you out of this house tonight." "You can't do this to me," she hissed. "I'm your wife. I'm Jamie's mother." "You're neither," Robert said with finality. "A wife doesn't manipulate and control. A mother doesn't torture her child for personal gain. You're a stranger who's been living in my house and hurting my son, and that ends now." The weeks that followed Catherine's departure were filled with revelation and healing. Robert took extended time away from his business to focus entirely on Jamie, something he should have done years earlier. Together, they worked with Dr. Martinez to design a prosthetic that would truly serve Jamie's needs rather than hinder them. At school, the changes in Jamie were immediately apparent to everyone, especially Maya. She found him one morning actually running laps around the playground, his face bright with joy and freedom. "Look at you," she shouted, clapping her hands as he jogged over to her. "You're like a different person." "I feel like a different person," Jamie panted happily. "Dr. Martinez says once I get my new leg, I'll be able to do everything other kids do. Maybe even play sports." Maya's grandmother watched from the fence, her weathered face creased with satisfaction. When Jamie approached to thank her again for her intervention, she waved away his gratitude. "You did the hard part," she said firmly. "You found your voice and used it. That's the bravest thing anyone can do." The legal proceedings against Catherine and Dr. Harrison were swift and decisive. Faced with overwhelming evidence of medical fraud and child abuse, both accepted plea agreements rather than face trial. Catherine was ordered to pay substantial restitution and was permanently barred from any contact with Jamie. Dr. Harrison lost his medical license and faced significant financial penalties. But for Jamie, the real victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the simple joy of movement without pain, of speaking truth without fear, of knowing that his voice mattered. The day Jamie received his new prosthetic was like a second birthday. Dr. Martinez had worked with him extensively to design something that was not only functional but also reflected his personality. The device was sleek and modern, with small details that made it uniquely his. When he strapped it on for the first time, the fit was perfect. No pinching, no pressure points, no awkward adjustments needed. It moved with him naturally, responding to his body's signals rather than fighting against them. "How does it feel?" Dr. Martinez asked, though his broad smile already provided the answer. Jamie stood, took a few careful steps, then broke into a run around the office. His laughter filled the space, pure and infectious. When he finally stopped, he was breathing hard but grinning from ear to ear. "It feels like flying," he said. Robert, who had been recording the moment on his phone, wiped tears from his eyes. "That's my boy." Maya had been pestering Jamie for weeks about entering the school's annual fun run. "Come on," she urged during lunch one day. "You're faster than half the kids in our grade now. It would be so cool." Jamie was tempted but nervous. Running on the playground was one thing. Competing in front of the entire school and all their parents was something else entirely. "What if I fall?" he asked. "What if everyone stares?" "So, what if they stare?" Maya replied with characteristic bluntness. "Let them see what you can really do. Let them see that you're not the same scared kid you used to be." Her words struck home. Jamie realized she was right. He wasn't the same person he'd been just months ago. That boy had been defined by his limitations, controlled by fear and others' expectations. This Jamie was different. This Jamie had choices. "Okay," he said, his voice growing stronger. "Let's do it." The day of the race dawned crisp and clear. The school grounds were crowded with families, and Jamie felt his old nervousness trying to resurface as he lined up with the other runners. Then he spotted his father in the crowd, giving him an encouraging thumbs up, and Mrs. Chen standing beside him with a proud smile. Maya bounced beside him at the starting line. "Remember," she whispered, "this isn't about winning or losing. This is about showing everyone, including yourself, who you really are." The starting gun fired and they were off. Jamie's first steps were cautious, but as his confidence grew, so did his speed. His new prosthetic moved flawlessly, responding to every shift in terrain, every change in pace. He wasn't the fastest runner in the race, but he wasn't the slowest either. Halfway through the course, Tyler Morrison pulled alongside him. For a moment, Jamie tensed, expecting some cruel comment or deliberate interference. Instead, Tyler just nodded and said, "Looking strong, Sullivan." It was the first time Tyler had ever used his name. As they rounded the final corner, Jamie could hear his father and Mrs. Chen cheering above all the other voices. Maya was still beside him, keeping pace, not because she had to, but because she wanted to share this moment with him. They crossed the finish line together, Jamie's time respectable but not record-breaking. It didn't matter. What mattered was that he'd done it. He'd run a race, competed with his peers, proven to himself and everyone watching that his prosthetic wasn't a limitation, but simply part of who he was. Robert swept him into a fierce hug, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you, son. Not because you ran the race, but because you chose to." As autumn gave way to winter, Jamie's new normal began to solidify. The constant pain that had defined his early childhood was now just a memory. His relationship with his father had deepened into something genuine and lasting. Most importantly, he'd learned to trust his own voice and advocate for his own needs. At school, he was no longer the isolated, fearful child who sat alone on benches. He'd joined the chess club, participated in science fair projects, and even tried out for the school play. The prosthetic that had once been a source of shame had become simply another part of himself, no more significant than his brown hair or his love of astronomy. Maya remained his closest friend, but their relationship had evolved too. She no longer needed to be his protector. Instead, they were equal partners in whatever adventures childhood brought their way. They studied together, played together, and dreamed together about futures that seemed limitless. One December evening, as Jamie was finishing his homework, Robert knocked on his door. "Got a minute?" he asked, settling into the reading chair by Jamie's desk. "Sure, Dad." "What's up?" Robert held up a letter with an official-looking letterhead. "This came today. It's from the State Medical Board. They want you to testify at a hearing about medical fraud and patient rights. Apparently, your case has opened up a much larger investigation." Jamie felt a familiar flutter of nervousness, but it was different now, anticipation rather than fear. "They want to hear from me. They want to hear from you, your voice, your experience, your truth. But only if you're ready. There's no pressure." Jamie thought about all the other children who might be suffering as he had, trapped by adults who prioritized control over care, manipulation over healing. He thought about the power of speaking truth, especially when it was difficult. "I'm ready," he said simply. The hearing room was formal and intimidating, filled with lawyers, medical professionals, and officials in dark suits. Jamie, now 8 years old and significantly taller thanks to his proper prosthetic fit, walked to the witness chair with confidence that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. The questions were gentle but thorough. Jamie described the years of unnecessary pain, the way his concerns had been dismissed, the dramatic improvement once he received appropriate care. His voice was clear and steady, his testimony devastating in its simple honesty. "Can you tell us how you felt when adults didn't believe you about your pain?" the lead investigator asked. Jamie considered the question carefully. "I felt like I didn't matter, like my feelings and my body weren't important enough to listen to. I thought maybe I was wrong about what I was feeling, or that being in pain was just normal for someone like me." "And how do you feel now?" "I feel like I have a voice, and I feel like it's important to use it, especially for kids who might not be able to speak up for themselves yet." When he finished testifying, the room was silent for a long moment. Then unexpectedly scattered applause began from the gallery, where Robert, Maya, and Mrs. Chen sat beaming with pride. The investigation that Jamie's testimony helped launch led to significant reforms in pediatric prosthetic care and stronger oversight of medical devices for children. His case became a landmark in patient rights advocacy, though Jamie himself remained focused on simply being a normal kid. On Jamie's 9th birthday, Robert organized a party unlike any they'd had before. Instead of the formal adult-supervised affairs Catherine had preferred, this was a real children's party held at a local park. Maya was there, of course, along with classmates who had become genuine friends over the past year. Even Tyler Morrison showed up, awkwardly offering Jamie a wrapped present that turned out to be a book about prosthetic innovations throughout history. "I thought you might like it," Tyler mumbled, his face red with embarrassment. "My cousin, the one I told you about, he said you might find it interesting." Jamie accepted the gift graciously, understanding that this was Tyler's way of making amends for years of cruelty. People could change, he'd learned. Sometimes they just needed time and the right motivation. The highlight of the party was a 3-legged race that Maya had insisted on organizing. She paired herself with Jamie, and together they hobbled and laughed their way across the grass, finishing dead last but having more fun than the winners. As the sun began to set and guests started heading home, Jamie found himself sitting on the same style of bench where Maya had first approached him years ago. But everything was different now. He wasn't alone, wasn't in pain, wasn't afraid. Maya plopped down beside him, chocolate cake still smeared on her cheek. "Good party?" "The best," Jamie agreed. "You know what I love most about it?" "What?" "Nobody felt sorry for you. They were just celebrating who you are, not worried about what you can't do." Jamie nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. For so long his prosthetic had been seen as a tragedy, something to be hidden or overcome or endured. Now it was simply part of his story, not the whole story, not even the most important part, just one element of who he was. Robert approached them, his suit jacket slung over his shoulder and his tie loosened. He looked younger somehow, more relaxed than Jamie could ever remember seeing him. "Ready to head home, birthday boy?" "Ready, Dad." As they walked toward the car, Jamie's prosthetic clicking softly against the pavement in a rhythm that no longer bothered him, he reflected on everything that had changed. He'd learned that his voice mattered, that pain wasn't something he had to accept, that the adults in his life weren't always right, and that real friendship was worth fighting for. Most importantly, he'd learned that he was never broken to begin with. He was just a kid who'd needed someone to listen, someone to believe him, and someone to help him find his own strength. A future stretched ahead, full of possibilities he'd never dared to imagine during those dark years, when pain and fear had defined his existence. He could run now, play sports, chase dreams, speak truth. He could be anything he wanted to be. And for the first time in his young life, Jamie Sullivan believed it completely. Jamie Sullivan stood at the starting line of the Chicago Youth Marathon, his racing number pinned carefully to his shirt. At 14, he was tall and lean, his prosthetic leg a marvel of modern engineering that bore no resemblance to the crude, ill-fitting device that had once caused him so much pain. In the crowd of spectators, Robert cheered alongside Mrs. Chen, whose wisdom and courage had started Jamie's journey toward healing. Maya, now his girlfriend as well as his best friend, held up a handmade sign reading, "Go Jamie," with stars drawn around the border. The starting gun fired, and Jamie surged forward with hundreds of other young runners. His stride was smooth and powerful, his prosthetic working in perfect harmony with his body. He wasn't running to win, though he had a good chance at placing in his division. He was running because he could, because he loved the feeling of movement, because every step was a celebration of how far he'd come. As he rounded the first mile marker, Jamie caught sight of a young girl in the crowd, maybe 7 years old, watching the race from a wheelchair. Her eyes were bright with longing, and Jamie recognized that look, the hunger to participate, to be part of something bigger than yourself. After the race, Jamie made his way over to where the girl sat with what appeared to be her parents. "Hi," he said, still breathing hard from his run. "I'm Jamie. I saw you watching the race." The girl nodded shyly. "I'm Sophia. You run really fast." "Thanks. I noticed you have wheels instead of legs. That's pretty cool." Sophia giggled. "My legs don't work the same way other people's do." "My leg doesn't either," Jamie said, tapping his prosthetic. "But you know what I learned? Different doesn't mean broken. It just means we get to figure out our own way of doing things." He spent several more minutes talking with Sophia and her parents, sharing his story and the contact information for Dr. Martinez, who now ran a comprehensive program for young people with physical differences. As he finally rejoined his family and friends, Maya smiled up at him. "Making new friends?" "Hopefully helping someone find their voice," Jamie replied, thinking of how Mrs. Chen had first seen his pain and chosen to act, how Maya had stood up to bullies when he couldn't stand up for himself, how his father had finally learned to listen. "That's what heroes do," Maya said simply. Jamie laughed, but he understood what she meant. Not the cape-wearing, building-jumping kind of hero, but the everyday kind. People who saw suffering and chose to alleviate it, who spoke truth even when it was difficult, who refused to let others define their limitations. He'd spent his early childhood believing he was broken, allowing others to keep him weak and dependent. Now he knew better. He wasn't a victim of his circumstances. He was the author of his own story, and it was going to be an amazing story. If this story of courage, truth, and triumph touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up and share it with others who might need to hear Jamie's message. Every child deserves to have their voice heard and their pain taken seriously. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories that remind us of the power of speaking truth and standing up for what's right. Your support helps us continue sharing these important messages with the world. Remember, you are stronger than you think, your voice matters, and you are never broken. Sometimes you just need the right people to help you shine.